At 5:47 on a freezing Milwaukee evening, Faith Russell opened a brown leather wallet beside a hospital ATM and stopped breathing. Inside were 6 thick bundles of cash. $30,000. Faith had 23 18s to her name, a broken-down Chevrolet, and an eviction notice for $140 due lying on the passenger seat. For one terrible second, the money looked less like temptation and more like survival. Still, she found the owner and returned every dollar. "It wasn't mine," Faith said, refusing his reward. But the driver beside him kept staring at her. 2 days later, Faith saw his black Lincoln behind her daughter's school. The next morning it followed her again, and on the third day the driver finally stepped out. "Before we continue, tell us what country you're watching from and your local time." And if stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices mean something to you, consider subscribing. 3 days before Faith Russell found $30,000 beside a hospital ATM, her morning began with the sound of a refrigerator trying not to die. At 5:20 a.m., its motor rattled twice, hummed weakly, then settled into the same tired vibration Faith had been listening to for months. She opened her eyes in the dark. For a few seconds she stayed beneath the thin blanket and listened to the apartment around her. Pipes clicking behind the wall. A truck groaning somewhere on West Center Street. The soft whistle of wind pressing against the kitchen window. Then she reached for her phone. 5:20. Battery 31%. Bank balance $46.31. Faith stared at that last number longer than she meant to. Then she got up. At 36, Faith had become skilled at making scarcity look ordinary. She tied her natural black curls into a neat, low bun pulled on gray sweatpants and an old Lakeside Senior Meals sweatshirt, and walked quietly into the kitchen so she wouldn't wake Chloe. The apartment had 2 small bedrooms, though calling Faith's room a bedroom was generous. Her bed nearly touched both walls, and the closet door couldn't open completely unless she moved a plastic laundry basket. But Chloe had her own room. Faith had insisted on that. She turned on one burner and placed 2 slices of bread in a skillet with a piece of American cheese between them. 1 grilled cheese. She cut it diagonally. 2 triangles always looked like more food than 1 square sandwich. By 5:42, 9-year-old Chloe Russell appeared in the doorway, wearing mismatched socks and rubbing one eye. "Morning, baby, morning." Chloe climbed onto a chair. She looked at the plate. "Where's yours?" Faith poured coffee into a chipped blue mug. "I'll eat at work." It was a lie so practiced that it no longer sounded like one. Chloe studied her for a moment. "You said that yesterday, and yesterday I ate." What Faith paused. Something extremely nutritious. "What a muffin." Chloe narrowed her eyes. What kind? Faith smiled. The kind that interrogates people before 6 in the morning. That earned the laugh she wanted. For the next 20 minutes, their apartment almost felt untouched by money. Chloe complained about spelling homework. Faith redid one of her daughter's braids near the temple. They argued about whether a jacket was necessary. It's 38 degrees. It's not even snowing. That is not how temperature works. Eventually, Chloe surrendered and put on the jacket. After breakfast, Faith opened the cabinet beneath the microwave. Inside was an envelope marked gas. She removed a $20 bill. From another envelope marked groceries, she took 10. She left $16.31 untouched in her checking account because the electric company was scheduled to attempt an automatic payment Friday. Faith knew the arithmetic was impossible. She performed it anyway. At 6:28, they walked downstairs. Her 2008 Chevrolet Malibu sat beneath a street lamp with faded silver paint, a rust spot above the rear wheel, and a driver's side mirror held steady by black electrical tape. Faith turned the key. The engine coughed. She waited. "Come on," she whispered. Another turn. The Malibu groaned to life. Chloe raised both hands, still undefeated. Faith smiled. "Don't celebrate yet." As she shifted into drive, Something small rolled inside the cup holder. A penny. Faith picked it up. 1996. The copper had darkened around Lincoln's face, and one edge had been scratched years ago. She rubbed her thumb across it. Her father had given her that penny when she was 8. They had been standing outside a corner store in Racine after Faith found a $5 bill near the curb. $5 had felt enormous to a child. She had immediately imagined candy. Her father had made her wait near the store entrance until a frightened woman came searching for it. After Faith returned the bill, he placed a penny in her palm. She had frowned. "I gave back $5 and I get 1 cent. Her father laughed. Then he closed her fingers around it. "What you keep says something about you," he'd told her. "What you return says even more." Faith hadn't fully understood him then. 28 years later, she still had the penny. Mom Faith blinked. Chloe was watching her. "You doing the penny thing again?" Faith dropped it back into the cup holder. "There is no penny thing. There is definitely a penny thing." Faith pulled away from the curb. By 7:15, Chloe was at Harriet Tubman Elementary, and Faith was heading toward Lakeside Senior Meals. The program operated from the basement level of a community services building, where the hallways always smelled faintly of coffee, disinfectant, and cooked vegetables. Faith changed into her uniform-loaded insulated bags into rolling carts and checked her route sheet. 27 deliveries. Mrs. Evelyn Harper was stop 6. Faith knew Evelyn's hearing wasn't good, so she knocked 3 times, waited, then knocked 3 more. When the door finally opened, Evelyn smiled. "I thought you forgot me. I've never forgotten you. You were late last Thursday, 4 minutes. I was starving. You had crackers. I don't recognize crackers as a meal." Faith laughed and carried the container inside. Before leaving, she loosened the lid on Evelyn's soup because arthritis made it difficult for her to open. Stop 11 was Mr. Wallace, who needed everything placed on the left side of his kitchen table because his wheelchair couldn't turn easily near the refrigerator. Stop 16 was 79-year-old Dolores Green, who always asked whether Faith had eaten. "You're too skinny," Dolores said. "I ate." "What?" Faith hesitated. Dolores raised an eyebrow. "Muffin." "What kind?" Faith stared at her. Dolores smiled triumphantly. "That's what I thought." At 1:40 p.m., Faith sat in the Malibu between deliveries and opened her lunch bag. Inside was an apple and a packet of peanut butter crackers. Her stomach tightened. She ate half the apple and saved the rest for Chloe. At 2:05, Faith returned to Lakeside. Rebecca Collins stood near the dispatch desk holding a clipboard. "Everybody listen up." The room quieted. Rebecca looked exhausted rather than angry. "We lost another municipal funding allocation. Starting next week, overtime is frozen. No unauthorized route extensions. And we need arrival times tightened." Someone muttered, "We're already doing 30 stops." "I know." Rebecca's voice softened briefly. "I know what you're doing out there. But the numbers are the numbers." Faith hated that sentence. Numbers were always numbers until they belonged to somebody. A 7-minute delay could mean helping a woman find her medication. An extra 3 miles could mean checking on a man who hadn't answered his door. But the computer didn't record those things. It recorded late, completed, incomplete, overtime. Faith signed her route sheet and said nothing. At 4:36, she picked Chloe up from the after-school program. On the drive home, Chloe talked for 7 uninterrupted minutes about a classmate named Olivia who had apparently committed an unforgivable crime involving glitter glue. Faith listened seriously. At a red light, the Malibu's dashboard flickered. The engine made a low, whining sound. Faith's smile disappeared. "What was that?" Chloe asked. "Old cars complain. Is it okay?" Faith glanced at the gauges. "It's okay." Another lie. They reached their apartment just after 5. Faith climbed the stairs carrying her work bag and a grocery sack containing pasta tomato sauce, milk bananas, and the cheapest loaf of bread she'd found. Something white was wedged beneath their door. She stopped. Chloe nearly walked into her. Mom Faith set the groceries down and pulled out the envelope. Property management. Final notice. Her fingers went cold. She opened it. Past due balance 1,840. Payment required within 5 days. Faith read it twice, then once more. What's that? She looked over her shoulder. Chloe was watching. Faith folded the notice in half. Then again, nothing. School thing, grown-up thing. Bad grown-up thing. Faith forced a smile. Just boring. Chloe accepted that answer and carried the groceries inside. Faith remained in the hallway. 5 days. $140. $46.31 had been everything that morning. Now even that was partly gone. From inside the apartment, Chloe called, "Mom, can we have spaghetti in a minute?" Faith slipped the folded notice into her pocket. Later that night, after Chloe was asleep, Faith went downstairs alone. The Malibu sat beneath the street lamp. She opened the driver's door, but didn't get in. Instead, she reached into the cup holder and picked up the old penny. 1996. 1 cent. Her father's voice came back as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. What you keep says something about you. What you return says even more. Faith closed her hand around the penny. She had no idea that within 72 hours life would place $30,000 in that same hand, and no one would be watching. Or so she would believe. The Malibu made the sound again at 6:41 the next morning. This time Faith couldn't pretend she hadn't heard it. A high mechanical whine rose from beneath the hood as she waited at a red light on North Avenue. The dashboard lights dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. Faith tightened both hands around the steering wheel. "Please." The light turned green. She pressed the accelerator. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the car lurched forward. From the passenger seat, Chloe looked up from her spelling cards. That sounded worse than complaining. Faith kept her eyes on the road. "It's becoming dramatic. Maybe it gets that from you." Faith turned slowly toward her. Chloe grinned. "You've been waiting to say that, haven't you? Since yesterday." Faith laughed despite herself. 10 minutes later, she dropped Chloe at school. But instead of driving directly to Lakeside Senior Meals, Faith turned toward a small repair garage she had used twice before. Miller's Auto Repair occupied an old brick building between a laundromat and a tire shop. Faith pulled in at 7:08. 20 minutes later, a mechanic named Luis came back carrying a diagnostic printout. He didn't have the expression she wanted to see. Alternators failing. How failing? Enough that I wouldn't trust it. Faith looked toward the Malibu through the office window. How much? Luis glanced at the paper. Parts and labor, $612. Faith thought she had misheard him. $612, I can probably get it down a little if I find a remanufactured unit. How little? Maybe $550. $550 might as well have been $5,000. Faith folded her arms. How long do I have? Luis hesitated. That's not really how alternators work. Pretend I'm asking how long before it becomes somebody else's problem on the side of the road. Could be 2 weeks. Faith waited. Could be tomorrow. There it was. The answer people gave when there was no answer. Faith thanked him and drove to work. Every sound the Malibu made now seemed louder. At Lakeside, Rebecca Collins was standing beside the dispatch board. Faith waited until the morning rush slowed. Rebecca, yeah. Any chance somebody dropped a shift this week? Rebecca looked at her. You need hours. As many as I can get. Rebecca's face changed slightly. Faith hated that change. Pity. Overtime freeze started this morning. I could cover something off clock and move the hours no. Rebecca lowered her voice. Faith, don't work unpaid. That's not helping anybody. I just need a few extra shifts. I know. Again, those 2 words, I know. People said them when they couldn't change anything. Faith nodded and turned away. At the loading table, another driver Denise had overheard. You ever use Quick Cash on Fond du Lac? Faith looked at her. Payday place? They'll give you $600 today, and take $1,200 tomorrow. Not tomorrow. You know what I mean. Denise shrugged. Sometimes you do what you gotta do. Faith knew that sentence, too. Her mother had done what she had to do when Faith was 14. A $300 payday loan became $427. Then another loan covered the first. By Christmas, groceries were being bought with borrowed money, and interest was growing faster than wages. Faith remembered her mother sitting at the kitchen table with unopened envelopes stacked beside her. No, Faith said quietly. I'm not doing that. Denise didn't argue. By noon, Faith had completed 14 stops. At stop 15, she found Mr. Wallace waiting beside his window. You're early. Don't sound disappointed. I had prepared a complaint. Save it for tomorrow. He smiled. Faith placed his food exactly where he could reach it. These tiny routines mattered to her. They were predictable, unlike rent, unlike engines, unlike bank balances. At 3:18, Faith received a message from Chloe's teacher. Reminder field trip permission slips and 38 payment due Friday. Faith stared at the screen. She had never seen a number as small as $38 look so large. That evening, Chloe didn't mention the field trip. That was what made Faith suspicious. At home, Chloe normally narrated everything that happened at school with the detail of a courtroom witness. But that night she talked about spelling. Lunch, a broken pencil, nothing about the trip. At 8:10, while putting away clean laundry, Faith saw a yellow sheet sticking from Chloe's backpack. Milwaukee Public Museum field trip. Cost $38. Faith read it. Then she noticed the signature line was blank. Chloe, her daughter, appeared in the doorway. Yeah? What is this? Chloe's eyes dropped to the paper. Oh, were you going to show me I forgot? Faith waited. Chloe was a terrible liar. You've been talking about this museum trip for 2 weeks. I don't really want to go anymore. Why? Chloe shrugged. Just don't. Faith sat on the edge of the bed. Come here. Chloe approached slowly. Is this about the money? Silence. That was the answer, baby. It's okay. No. Olivia said museums are boring anyway. You've been counting down the days. Chloe stared at her socks. Then she whispered, You said the car needs something. Faith felt something inside her tighten. Children were supposed to worry about spelling tests and whether their friends saved them a seat. Not alternators. Not rent. Not whether $38 would hurt their mother. Faith picked up a pen. She signed the permission slip. You're going. But you're going. Do we have $38? Faith looked at her daughter. She could have lied. Instead, she said, Not tonight. Chloe frowned. Then how I have until Friday. Mom, that is my problem, not yours. Faith kissed her forehead. You are 9 years old. You're allowed to be excited about a museum. Chloe finally smiled. A small smile, but real. After she fell asleep, Faith sat alone at the kitchen table. She opened her banking app. 2318. She wrote the numbers on the back of an envelope. Rent $1,840. Car $612. Field trip $38. Gas. Electricity. Groceries. She stopped right. There was no mathematical trick hidden in those numbers. No rearrangement that made them work. Faith leaned back and covered her face. For one dangerous moment, she understood why people walked into payday loan offices. Not because they were stupid, because desperation made tomorrow feel less important than surviving today. Faith lowered her hands. On the table beside the bills was the 1996 penny. She must have brought it upstairs without realizing. She rolled it beneath her finger. 1 cent. Nearly worthless. Yet she'd protected it through 4 apartments, 3 jobs, 1 failed relationship, her father's funeral, Chloe's birth, and every move since. Faith gave a tired laugh. Dad, you could have left me at 20. The apartment remained silent. The next morning, Faith arrived at Lakeside at 7:12. Rebecca was waiting. Faith route change. She handed her a sheet. Special delivery to St. Catherine Hospital. Patient discharge meal package. Needs to be there before 6. Faith glanced at the address. The hospital was several miles outside her normal route. My car's acting up. You want me to give it to Denise? Faith thought about the missing hours, about being seen as unreliable. No. She folded the paper. I've got it. At 5:11 that afternoon, after 26 regular stops, Faith placed the hospital meal package on the passenger seat. The eviction notice lay beneath it. She turned the key. The Malibu hesitated, then started. Faith exhaled. Just one more trip. She pulled onto the road toward St. Catherine Hospital. The sun was already sinking behind Milwaukee, turning the clouds orange over the cold streets. Faith didn't know that near an ATM in the hospital parking lot, a brown leather wallet was about to fall from someone's coat. She didn't know what was inside, and she certainly didn't know that before the evening ended, she would hold more cash in her hands than she had earned in many months. $30,000. Enough to solve every problem written on the envelope sitting beside her. At least for a while. By the time Faith Russell reached St. Catherine Hospital, the dashboard clock read 5:36 p.m. The Malibu had nearly stalled twice. Faith parked near the outpatient entrance, grabbed the insulated meal bag, and hurried inside. Her delivery was for a 72-year-old woman named Lorraine Peters, who had been discharged after hip surgery but was waiting for her daughter to pick her up. Faith found her near the pharmacy. Mrs. Peters Lorraine looked up. "You're the food lady. I've been called worse." Faith checked the label, then placed the containers inside Lorraine's canvas bag. "Soup is on top, chicken underneath. Don't try carrying all this yourself." Lorraine smiled. "You sound like my daughter." "I'll take that as a compliment." Faith wished her well and headed back outside. 5:47 p.m. The temperature had dropped sharply. Faith pulled her jacket closed and crossed the parking lot. Her phone vibrated. A message from the property manager. "Final reminder, please contact office regarding balance $1.0840. Faith stopped walking. She read it once, then locked the screen. Not now. The ATM stood near the edge of the parking structure beneath a bright security light. Faith passed it, took 3 more steps, then noticed something on the pavement. Brown leather, a wallet. She looked around. Nobody nearby. Faith picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. Her first thought was driver's license. If she found an address, she could leave the wallet with hospital security. She opened it, then froze. Cash. Not loose bills. Bundles. Thick bundles of $100 notes secured with paper bands. Faith stared. She glanced around again. A woman pushed a stroller toward the entrance 50 yards away. An ambulance turned into the emergency lane. Nobody was watching Faith. She moved beneath the ATM light and counted the bundles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each band read $5,000. Faith's mouth went dry. $30,000. For several seconds, she simply stood there, holding it. Her mind did something frighteningly practical. It began spending the money. $1,840. Rent paid $612. Alternator replaced $38. Chloe's museum trip. Electric bill, groceries. New tires before winter. Maybe 6 months of rent ahead. Maybe a savings account with enough money that an unexpected repair wouldn't feel like a death sentence. Faith closed the wallet quickly. No. She didn't know whether she was speaking to herself or the money. She searched for identification. Henry Caldwell, age 64, Milwaukee address. Faith recognized the last name vaguely, but couldn't place it. There were several cards and receipts. Nothing explaining why someone carried $30,000 in cash. Faith looked toward the hospital. Security desk. That was the obvious answer. Take it inside, hand it over, leave. Her phone vibrated again. She ignored it. Then her eyes drifted toward the Malibu. Through the windshield, she could see the white corner of the eviction notice on the passenger seat. 5 days. Faith looked back at the wallet. A thought came quietly. You don't have to take all of it. She hated how reasonable it sounded. 500, maybe 612 exactly. Fix the car. The owner would still have 29,388. Would someone carrying $30,000 even notice? Faith immediately knew the answer didn't matter. Another thought arrived. Take the rent. $1,840. Keep Chloe housed. Return everything else. You aren't buying jewelry. You aren't taking a vacation. You're keeping a roof over your child's head. Faith swallowed. This was what temptation actually looked like. Not greed. Justification. She walked to the Malibu and sat behind the wheel. The wallet rested in her lap. For perhaps 30 seconds, Faith allowed herself to imagine the impossible relief of not being afraid. She imagined opening the refrigerator without calculating, paying the mechanic without negotiating, signing Chloe's field trip form without wondering what would be sacrificed for $38. Faith opened the wallet again. $30,000. She pulled one bundle halfway out. Her hands began trembling. Then something rolled beneath her elbow, a tiny metallic sound against plastic. Faith looked down. The penny. 1996. It had shifted from the cup holder when she'd sat down. Faith picked it up. Her father's voice came back. What you keep says something about you. What you return says even more. Faith shut her eyes. That's easy to say when it's $5, Dad. She almost laughed. Instead, tears burned behind her eyes. Not because she wanted the money, because she needed it. There was a difference, and somehow that made returning it harder. Faith put the bundle back, closed the wallet, then placed the penny beside it. All right. She searched the receipts more carefully. One had been printed less than 20 minutes earlier at the hospital cafe. Another was from the parking garage. Henry Caldwell might still be nearby. Faith got out. For the next 10 minutes, she searched the hospital entrance and parking area. Nothing. Then, near the far end of the lot, she noticed a black Lincoln sedan. 2 men stood beside it. One was older tall, dressed in a dark wool coat. He was checking his pockets repeatedly. The other man wore a charcoal driver's coat and held a phone. Faith couldn't hear them at first. Then the wind carried the older man's voice. It has to be here. We'll find it, the driver said. I had it when we left the building. The driver's gaze swept across the pavement. Faith stopped. She looked at the license again. Henry Caldwell. The older man's face matched. Faith began walking toward them. The driver noticed her first. Walter Bennett had spent 24 years driving executives, attorneys, politicians, and wealthy families around Milwaukee. He had learned to notice people approaching before his passengers did. His eyes went immediately to Faith's hand, the brown wallet. Mr. Caldwell. Henry turned. Faith stopped several feet away. You, Henry Caldwell? Henry stared at the wallet. Yes. Faith didn't hand it over. Middle name? Henry blinked. What's your middle name? Walter almost smiled despite the situation. Henry answered. James. Faith checked the license. Henry James Caldwell. She held out the wallet. Think this belongs to you? Henry took it. His relief was immediate. Then instinct took over. He opened the wallet. Faith watched his eyes move toward the bundles. She knew what he was doing. She didn't resent it. $30,000 was $30,000. Count it, she said. Henry looked up. Faith's face was tired but steady. Go ahead. Henry hesitated. Then he counted. Walter watched Faith instead. 6 bundles, $30,000. Every cent remained. Henry stared at her. You found this where near the ATM, and you just brought it back. Faith glanced toward her battered Malibu. I figured whoever lost $30,000 was probably having a worse evening than I was. Henry gave a stunned laugh. He didn't know how wrong that sentence was. Not yet. Faith turned slightly. Her insulated lakeside senior meals bag hung from her shoulder, Walter's eyes fixed on it. Something shifted in his expression. A memory. A name he hadn't allowed himself to say aloud that week. Jordan. Faith's phone rang. She answered. Hello? A pause. Yes, Mr. Franklin? I know. Walter looked at her. Faith turned away from the wind. No, don't skip dinner. I'll make sure you eat tonight. Walter stopped breathing. 3 years disappeared in a sentence. He had heard those words before. Not from Faith, from his son. Jordan had once told him about a meal delivery woman who said them whenever he tried to pretend he wasn't hungry. Walter stared at Faith. She didn't notice. She was already walking away. But Walter Bennett watched until the old silver Malibu disappeared from the hospital parking lot. And for the first time in 3 years, he wondered whether a stranger he'd never thanked had just walked back into his life. Henry Caldwell counted the money twice. Not because he believed Faith Russell had stolen anything, because $30,000 had a way of making people distrust even their own eyes. 6 bundles, $5,000 each, every band intact, every bill exactly where it had been. Henry slowly closed the wallet. 30,000, he said. Faith nodded. Good. Walter Bennett remained beside the Lincoln, but his attention was no longer on the money. It was on Faith. Henry reached inside his coat. Wait. Faith had already taken 2 steps toward her Malibu. She turned. Henry opened the wallet again and pulled several $100 bills from one bundle. At least let me give you something. Faith looked at the money. For 1 second too long. Walter noticed. So did Henry. That brief hesitation told them more than an immediate refusal would have. Faith needed it. She looked toward her car, the faded paint, the taped mirror, the white eviction notice visible through the windshield. Then Henry counted 10 bills, $1,000. Faith's throat tightened. $1,000. The alternator could be replaced tomorrow. Chloe's field trip could be paid. There would still be enough for groceries and gas. Faith imagined handing Luis, the mechanic, $612 without asking whether he could wait until Friday. Henry extended the money. You saved me from a serious problem. Faith didn't move. It was on the ground. And you returned it. It belonged to you. That doesn't mean everyone would have. Faith looked at the bills again. Then she shook her head. I can't. Why not? Because I desperately need it, she thought. Instead, she said, because then it starts feeling like I returned your wallet because there was something in it for me. Henry frowned slightly. That's not what it means. Maybe not to you. She gave him a tired smile. It wasn't mine. The same words she would remember days later. Henry lowered his hand. He was accustomed to solving awkward situations with money. Usually money worked. A generous tip corrected inconvenience. A donation corrected guilt. A check could make a problem disappear before he had to spend much time looking at it. But Faith wasn't offended by his offer. She simply didn't want it. That unsettled him more. What's your name? Faith Russell. Henry repeated it. Faith Russell. Yes. I'm Henry Caldwell. I know, it was on your driver's license. For the first time since realizing the wallet was missing. Henry laughed. Walter almost did too. Faith turned away. Her phone rang. She'd answered as she walked toward the Malibu. Yes, Mr. Franklin. Walter's attention sharpened. Faith stopped beside her driver's door. No, don't skip dinner. A pause. I know your microwave is acting up. Put the soup in the saucepan like I showed you. Another pause. Then Faith said the words, I'll make sure you eat tonight. Walter went completely still. The hospital parking lot seemed to disappear. For an instant, he wasn't 52 years old standing beside a polished Lincoln. He was 49 sitting across from his son Jordan in a cramped apartment on North 27th Street. Jordan had lost nearly 20 pounds. Walter had noticed. He just hadn't understood why. You eating enough? Walter had asked. Jordan rolled his eyes. Dad, that's not an answer. There's this woman from the meal program. She won't leave me alone. Walter remembered, laughing. What woman? The delivery lady. Jordan had smiled then. A real smile. She keeps saying, "I'll make sure you eat tonight." Like she's my mother or something. Walter hadn't asked her name. He had never imagined he would need it. 3 months later, Jordan was gone. Walter Henry's voice brought him back. Faith was climbing into the Malibu. Walter stared at the insulated bag hanging behind her seat. Lakeside Senior Meals, the same program Jordan had mentioned. "Walter? Sorry. You all right?" Walter barely heard him. The Malibu's engine struggled. Faith tried again. It started. She pulled away. Walter watched until the taillights disappeared. Henry followed his gaze. "You know her?" Walter didn't answer immediately. "I don't know." Henry raised an eyebrow. "That usually means no." Walter looked at him. "My son used to get meals from that program." Henry's expression softened. He knew about Jordan. Not everything. Enough. "You think she knew him? I don't know." Walter opened the rear passenger door. Henry didn't get in. "Then ask her." Walter shook his head. "Jordan never told me her name. But you heard what she said? A sentence isn't proof." Henry studied his driver. In 12 years he had rarely seen Walter visibly shaken. "You want me to find her? No." The answer came too quickly. Walter softened it. "No, thank you." Henry finally entered the car. Walter closed the door, walked around, and sat behind the wheel. But he didn't start the engine. Instead, he opened the center console. Inside were registration papers, sunglasses, mints, charging cables, and a small photograph. Walter pulled it out. Jordan Bennett stood beside Lake Michigan, hands in the pockets of a denim jacket, smiling at whoever held the camera. 29 years old. It had been taken 7 months before his death. Walter turned the photograph over. Nothing written there. But he remembered another object. A card, stored in a wooden box at home. Jordan had written several notes during the final months of his life. Most were unfinished thoughts, names, phone numbers, reminders. One mentioned a woman from the meal service. Walter had read it only once. He had not been able to read it again. Until now. That night, Faith was at her kitchen table when Chloe walked in carrying the field trip form. "Friday," Chloe said quietly. Faith looked at the $38 amount. "I remember. It's okay if I can't go. You're going." How Faith glanced toward her purse. For a moment she saw Henry's $100 bills. She could have accepted them. Nobody would have judged her. Maybe she shouldn't have refused. Then she looked at Chloe. "We'll figure it out." Chloe nodded, though she clearly wasn't convinced. After putting her daughter to bed, Faith opened her banking app. 2318. She laughed once bitterly. $30,000 had passed through her hands that evening. Now she had 23. Downstairs, the Malibu sat beneath the street lamp. The penny remained in its cup holder. Across Milwaukee, Walter sat alone at his dining table. A wooden box rested before him. He opened it. Inside were Jordan's watch hospital bracelet photographs and a folded card. Walter unfolded it carefully. Jordan's handwriting was uneven. "Dad, if you ever meet the lady from Lakeside, tell her thanks. She kept bringing food even when I told her I wasn't hungry." Walter stopped reading. His eyes burned. Below it was another line. "She never made me feel like I was somebody she had to save." Walter pressed his thumb against the paper. Then he remembered Faith standing beneath the hospital lights. "It wasn't mine. The old Malibu, the meal bag, that sentence. I'll make sure you eat tonight." Walter folded the card. He needed to know. Not because he wanted to repay Faith. Not yet. Because for 3 years, Walter had carried the unbearable knowledge that a stranger might have shown his son kindness during a time when he himself had failed to see how badly Jordan needed help. The next morning, Walter drove Henry downtown. After dropping him at his office, he remained behind the wheel. On the passenger seat lay Jordan's card. Walter knew Faith's name. He knew where she worked. He also knew that approaching her with a dead man's letter based on one remembered sentence could be cruel if he was wrong. So Walter made a decision he would soon regret. He would watch first. Just long enough to be certain, at 7:38 a.m., Faith's Malibu pulled away from Harriet Tubman Elementary. Faith checked her rearview mirror. A black Lincoln turned onto the street behind her. She thought nothing of it. Not yet. At first, Faith Russell told herself the black Lincoln meant nothing. Milwaukee was full of black cars. Executives drove them. Airport services used them. Hotels kept fleets of them. A dark sedan appearing behind her at 7:38 on a Wednesday morning was not evidence of anything. Faith turned onto North Avenue. The Lincoln turned too. She glanced at the rearview mirror. Chloe was in the back seat, struggling with the zipper on her jacket. "Hold still at the next light," Faith said. "I can do it. You've been doing it for 3 blocks. I almost have it." The light turned red. Faith reached backward and fixed the zipper. When she looked into the mirror again, the Lincoln was 2 cars behind them. She recognized the chrome grille. Then the driver, Walter Bennett. Her stomach tightened. The light changed. Faith drove. The Lincoln remained behind her for another 6 blocks. At Harriet Tubman Elementary, Faith pulled into the drop-off lane. "Love you." "Love you too." "Field trip paper in your folder." "Yes." "Spelling words, yes." "Lunch, Mom." Okay. Chloe opened the door, then paused. "Who's that man?" Faith's eyes went immediately to the mirror. The Lincoln had stopped across the street. Walter remained behind the wheel. What man? The car guy. Faith forced herself not to turn around. Probably waiting for somebody. Chloe shrugged and ran toward the school entrance. Faith waited until her daughter was inside. Then she pulled away. The Lincoln didn't follow. That should have made her feel better. It didn't. At Lakeside Senior Meals, Faith loaded 24 deliveries into the Malibu. Rebecca handed her the route sheet. "You're covering Mrs. Carter, too. Denise out, kid sick." Faith scanned the list. "That puts me at 28. I know." Faith looked at Rebecca. "Yesterday, it was all about keeping roots tighter. Yesterday, I had Denise. There was no point arguing." Faith folded the sheet. "I'll get it done." By 10, the black Lincoln had almost disappeared from her mind. At 10:22, she saw it again. Faith was carrying 2 meal containers toward an apartment building on West Meinecke Avenue when she noticed the sedan parked half a block away. Engine running, Walter behind the wheel. Faith stopped. The insulated bag pulled against her shoulder. She stared. Walter looked down. Faith couldn't tell whether he was pretending not to see her. A horn sounded behind the Malibu. She moved. Inside the apartment building, Mrs. Evelyn Harper opened her door after the usual 6 knocks. "You look worried. I always look this beautiful." Evelyn didn't smile. "That's not what I said." Faith handed her the meal. "Just a long morning. Long mornings turn into long lives if you're not careful." Faith loosened the soup lid. "I'll write that down." When she returned outside, the Lincoln was gone. By lunchtime, Faith had built 3 explanations. The first was harmless. Walter happened to work in the neighborhood. The second was uncomfortable. Henry wanted to offer her another reward. The third frightened her. Maybe something had been missing from the wallet. A card, a document, a key. Money. Faith replayed the hospital parking lot. 6 bundles. Henry had counted them. $30,000. He had said nothing was missing, but what if he later decided otherwise? People with money had lawyers. People like Faith had overdue rent. At 1:17, she parked outside Mason's Diner and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. Tomato soup, $4.75. Faith sat near the window. Halfway through the bowl, she looked outside. The Lincoln was across the street. This time there was no doubt. Walter was watching her. Faith put down her spoon. Her appetite vanished. Walter noticed. He looked away. He hated himself for it. Jordan's card sat inside his coat pocket. Walter had spent the morning following Faith's route, trying to convince himself he was being careful rather than intrusive. He had learned almost nothing that could prove she was Jordan's delivery woman. What he had learned was different. Faith checked every apartment door twice. She carried groceries upstairs for one elderly customer. She waited beside another man's door until she heard him answer. None of it was dramatic. That was what bothered Walter. Jordan had described someone exactly like this. Someone who kept coming back. Walter pulled away from the curb before Faith finished eating. That afternoon, Faith picked Chloe up from school. Chloe climbed into the back seat and immediately asked, "Is the black car coming?" Faith's hand stopped on the gear shift. "Why would you ask that? You kept looking at it this morning." "I wasn't. You were." Faith looked at her daughter in the mirror. Children noticed the things adults worked hardest to hide. No, Faith said. "It's not coming." She hoped that was true. The next morning, Walter sat at his kitchen table before sunrise. Jordan's card lay open. He read the full note again. "Dad, if you ever meet the lady from Lakeside, tell her thanks. She kept bringing food even when I told her I wasn't hungry. Sometimes she'd leave an extra soup and pretend the kitchen packed too much." Walter swallowed. Then the final line. "She never made me feel like I was somebody she had to save." Walter closed his eyes. During Jordan's illness, Walter had offered money. Jordan refused. Walter had offered to move him home. Jordan refused that too. Walter had mistaken refusal for independence. Only after Jordan died had Walter learned how little food had been in his apartment. The shame had never left him. Now he wondered whether Faith had seen what a father had missed, but he still needed certainty. So he followed again. By Friday afternoon, Faith had had enough. She delivered a meal to 78-year-old Samuel Price in a small duplex near Sherman Park. Samuel opened the door using a walker. "You're early. Don't tell my supervisor. You'll ruin my reputation." Samuel chuckled. Faith placed the container on his table. When she returned outside, she saw Walter. He wasn't in the Lincoln. He was standing across the street, watching. Faith stopped. Something inside her shifted from fear to anger. She was tired of being watched. Tired of wondering whether a wealthy man had decided she looked suspicious after returning his money. Tired of checking mirrors while her daughter sat behind her. Faith walked toward the Malibu. Walter took one step forward. Faith immediately got inside and locked the doors. She started the engine. The alternator whined. Not now. The Malibu pulled away. Walter returned to the Lincoln. For several blocks, he followed. Faith watched him in the mirror. Then she made a decision. At the next intersection, she turned sharply into an almost empty parking lot behind a closed furniture store. Walter hesitated, then followed. Faith parked sideways across 2 spaces. The Lincoln stopped 20 yards away. For a moment, neither door opened. Faith's heart pounded. She thought about Chloe, about calling the police. Then Walter stepped out. Faith did the same. Cold wind crossed the empty lot. Walter raised both hands slightly. Ms. Russell, number Faith, walked towards him. Her fear had finally found a voice. "You've been outside my daughter's school. You've been following me at work. You sat across from me while I ate lunch." Walter's face tightened. "I can explain." "Then explain." Faith stopped several feet away. "If this is about that wallet, I returned every dollar. I know." "Then what do you want?" Walter reached slowly inside his coat. Faith stiffened. He stopped immediately. "It's paper." He withdrew a folded card, old, creased. Faith stared at it. Walter held it without approaching. "My name is Walter Bennett. I know who you are." "No." "You know I'm Mr. Caldwell's driver." His voice changed. "But 3 years ago I was also somebody's father." Faith said nothing. Walter looked down at the card. "Did you ever deliver meals to North 27th Street?" The anger in Faith's face faltered. Walter looked at her. Do you remember a man named Jordan Bennett? Faith searched her memory. Nothing came immediately. Then something did. A narrow apartment hallway, an unopened meal from the previous day, a young man pretending he wasn't hungry. Faith's expression changed. Walter saw it. And before she said a word, he knew. Faith Russell did not answer Walter Bennett's question in the parking lot. Not immediately. Jordan Bennett. The name hovered somewhere behind dozens of apartment doors, hundreds of meal containers, and years of faces Faith had learned only briefly before life moved them somewhere else. I don't know, she finally said. Walter nodded as if he had expected that. You delivered a lot of meals. I still do, I know. Faith's eyes hardened. Yes, you've made that pretty clear. Walter lowered the folded card. I owe you an apology. You owe my daughter one. That landed harder. Walter looked away. You're right. Faith crossed her arms against the cold. If you wanted to ask me about somebody, you could have asked. You didn't have to follow me. I wasn't sure it was you. So you decided to watch me. Walter had no defense that sounded respectable when spoken aloud. Yes. Faith shook her head and turned toward the Malibu. Ms. Russell. She stopped. Walter did not follow. My son died 3 years ago. Faith's shoulders lowered slightly. I'm sorry. He received meals from Lakeside during the last few months. Faith turned around. Walter held up the card. He wrote about someone there. He never gave me her name. Faith looked at the paper, but didn't approach. What did he write? Walter hesitated. That she kept coming back. Something stirred in Faith's memory. But it was incomplete. A voice. A narrow kitchen. A young man saying, "Leave it by the door." Faith shook her head. I need to get back to work. I understand. And don't follow me, I won't. She returned to the Malibu. Walter remained where he was. Faith started the engine. The alternator whined loudly. Walter heard it. Faith saw him hear it. For some reason, that embarrassed her more than the eviction notice ever had. She drove away. Walter kept his promise. He did not follow. But what he had already seen stayed with him. 2 mornings earlier, Faith's Malibu had died at an intersection during her route. Walter had been parked nearly a block away. He watched Faith turn the key 3 times. Nothing. Cars began stacking behind her. A driver leaned on his horn. Another shouted through an open window. Faith stepped out. She pushed the Malibu herself. No one helped. Walter reached for his door handle. Before he could open it, a delivery van stopped, and its driver helped Faith move the car to the curb. Walter remained inside the Lincoln. He watched Faith thank the stranger, wait 10 minutes, restart the Malibu, and continue her route. She didn't go home. At 11:36 that same morning, Walter saw her stop near a bus shelter. A woman sat beneath it with 2 plastic bags at her feet. Faith walked past, then stopped. She opened her lunch bag. Walter saw her look inside. 1 sandwich. Faith tore it in half. She handed half to the woman. No photograph, no audience, no speech. She simply returned to her car. Walter remembered Jordan's card. She never made me feel like I was somebody she had to save. Later that afternoon, Faith arrived at Lakeside, 11 minutes behind schedule. Rebecca Collins was waiting. Faith, we talked about this. I know, 11 minutes. Mr. Lawson fell. Rebecca paused. What bathroom floor? He couldn't get up. You called emergency services? Yes. Is he okay? They took him to St. Mary's. Rebecca exhaled, then looked at the tablet in her hand. I'll document it, but dispatch is going to flag the route. Faith stared at her. I wasn't leaving him there. I didn't say you should have. Then what exactly are we discussing Rebecca's exhaustion showed? We're discussing a system that doesn't know the difference. Faith looked toward the loading room. No, the system knows exactly what it measures. She took off her gloves. It just doesn't measure people. Walter had been outside waiting for Henry at a nearby office When he saw the exchange through the glass entrance, he couldn't hear every word. He saw enough. Faith wasn't perfect. She became impatient. She worried. She counted coins. She sometimes sat alone in her car with her forehead against the steering wheel before walking into the next building. But she kept going. Walter had spent 24 years driving wealthy people through Milwaukee. He had learned the city's geography by status. Lakefront homes, corporate towers, private clubs, neighborhoods passengers told him to avoid after dark. Following Faith showed him another map, a map of people waiting behind doors, a retired teacher who couldn't lift a saucepan, a veteran in a wheelchair, a widow who talked too long because nobody else visited, people who existed in databases as stops. Faith knew their names. Walter thought about Jordan. His son had been one of those stops. And Walter hadn't known. That evening, Faith sat at the kitchen table, while Chloe colored a worksheet. "You're quiet," Chloe said. "So are you. I'm doing homework." "Maybe I'm doing homework." Chloe looked at the empty table in front of her mother. On invisible paper, Faith smiled faintly. The black Lincoln hadn't appeared again. She should have felt relieved. Instead, Walter's question followed her. Jordan Bennett. After Chloe went to bed, Faith opened an old notebook where she sometimes wrote delivery notes before entering them into the Lakeside system. Most pages were meaningless now. Door codes, diet restrictions, phone numbers. Then found an entry dated 3 years earlier. J. Bennett, 27th St. Faith, stared. Underneath, doesn't answer first knock. Leave soup, check tomorrow. Another entry 2 days later says, not hungry, looks weak. Then extra sandwich. Faith closed the notebook. Now she remembered. Not everything. Enough. Jordan had been thin, maybe late 20s. He wore a blue hoodie almost every time she saw him. He hated opening the door. The first week he barely spoke. The second week, Faith noticed the previous day's container still sitting unopened. You didn't eat, wasn't hungry. Yesterday either. He shrugged. Faith knew hunger. She also knew pride, so she never said, you need help. She said kitchen packed too much soup. Jordan looked at the extra container. Everyday terrible management. Eventually he smiled. Faith sat alone in the kitchen, now staring at the old notebook. She had never known what happened to him. People disappeared from delivery lists all the time. Hospitalized, moved, transferred, dead. Workers weren't always told. Across town, Walter sat at his own table. Jordan's card was open again. But tonight, Walter wasn't reading the lines about food. He was reading what came afterward. Dad, don't feel bad if I didn't tell you everything. Sometimes it's easier to let a stranger see you're struggling because they don't remember the version of you that used to be strong. Walter covered his mouth. For 3 years, he had interpreted Jordan's silence as rejection. Now another possibility hurt even more. Shame. The next morning, Walter drove Henry Caldwell to a meeting. Henry watched him through the rearview mirror. You find out, Walter nodded. And it was her. You sure? Yes. Henry waited. What are you going to do? Walter looked through the windshield. I don't know. Henry leaned back. You wanted to thank her. I did. And now Walter thought of the broken Malibu, the half sandwich, the 11-minute delay, the way Faith had pushed her own car while strangers honked. I think she's in trouble. Henry's answer came naturally. Then help her. Walter shook his head. That's the problem. What problem? Walter looked at Henry in the mirror. If I walk up and hand her money, I'm doing exactly what my son said she never did to him. Henry frowned. My son said she never did to him. Henry frowned. Walter continued. I'm making her somebody who needs saving. For the first time, Henry understood. Walter folded Jordan's card and placed it in his coat. He needed to speak to Faith again, but this time he wouldn't follow her, and this time he wouldn't arrive with money. Faith Russell called Walter Bennett the next morning. She almost didn't. His number had been written on the back of a plain business card he'd left beneath the windshield wiper of her Malibu before leaving the parking lot. No message, no explanation. Just Walter Bennett. And a phone number. At 6:12 a.m., while Chloe was brushing her teeth, Faith stood beside the kitchen window and dialed. Walter answered on the second ring. "Hello, this is Faith Russell." Silence. "Then good morning." "I remember him." Walter didn't speak. Jordan Faith said, "I remember your son." Walter closed his eyes. He was sitting alone in the Lincoln outside Henry Caldwell's house. "Can we talk?" Faith looked toward the bathroom. "Not near my daughter's school. You have my word." They agreed to meet at a coffee shop on West North Avenue after Faith's morning deliveries. At 10:46, Faith entered wearing her lakeside jacket. Walter was already there. He stood when she approached. Faith remained standing. "Before we start, I need you to understand something." Walter nodded. "You scared me." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Faith pulled out the chair but didn't sit. When you're a woman driving an old car living where I live, and somebody in a black Lincoln starts showing up everywhere, you don't think maybe he wants to have a conversation. Walter lowered his eyes. "You think about your child." "Yes, I was wrong." The apology contained no excuse. That mattered. Faith sat. Walter placed Jordan's folded card on the table. "You said you remember him." "Some." Faith looked toward the window. North 27th Street, second floor, blue hoodie. Walter smiled, despite himself. He loved that thing. He wore it when it was warm. He wore it in July. Faith almost smiled. Then the memory sharpened. He was sick. "Yes, I didn't know how sick." "Neither did I." Faith looked at Walter. That answer carried something heavier than grief. Walter turned the coffee cup between his hands. Jordan had lymphoma. Faith's expression changed. He was diagnosed about 8 months before he died. Treatment worked for a while. Walter stopped. Then it didn't. "I'm sorry. He lost his warehouse job during treatment. Told me he had savings. He didn't." "No." Walter looked at the card. "I was driving for Mr. Caldwell then, working 60-hour weeks sometimes. Jordan kept telling me he was fine." His voice tightened. I wanted to believe him. Faith said nothing. "After he died, I cleaned out his apartment." Walter swallowed. There was almost nothing in the refrigerator. Mustard, half a bottle of water, 2 meal containers from Lakeside. Faith looked down. Walter continued. "I found this card in a drawer." He slid it toward her. Faith didn't touch it immediately. "What does it say? You can read it." "I don't know if I should." He wanted me to. Faith unfolded the card. Jordan's handwriting leaned unevenly across the page. "Dad, if you ever meet the lady from Lakeside, tell her thanks. She kept bringing food even when I told her I wasn't hungry." Faith stopped. A memory returned. Jordan standing behind a half-open door. "You don't have to keep checking on me." "I know." Then why do you, Faith, had lifted the meal bag? "Because I've got soup, and you're between me and an empty bag." Jordan had laughed. She hadn't remembered that laugh until now. Faith kept reading. Sometimes she'd leave an extra soup and pretend the kitchen packed too much. Faith pressed her lips together. Walter watched quietly. Then she reached the final lines. "She never made me feel poor. She never made me feel like I was somebody she had to save." Faith lowered the card. For several seconds, the sounds of the coffee shop seemed strangely distant. "I didn't know. I thought he just didn't like asking for things. He didn't." Faith looked at Walter. Some days he'd tell me he wasn't hungry, but the food from the day before would still be there. Walter nodded. "So I started bringing extra." Did Lakeside know? Faith gave a faint smile. "Probably better if we don't investigate that." Walter laughed once. It broke something open between them. Faith remembered more. Chicken noodle soup. That was his favorite. Walter looked surprised. He hated chicken noodle soup as a kid. Well, he ate mine. Apparently illness lowered his standards. Faith smiled. Then Walter's face changed. "I should have known." Faith understood immediately. Walter, I was his father. He was a grown man. That doesn't change it. No. Faith leaned forward. But shame makes people good at hiding. Walter stared at her. He didn't want you to see him weak. I would have helped. I know. So, why didn't he call? Faith thought carefully. Maybe because needing food from a stranger felt temporary. Walter waited. And needing it from his father felt real. The words hurt. But they also made sense. Walter looked out the window. I spent years thinking he shut me out because I failed him. Maybe he shut you out because he loved you. Walter's eyes filled. He didn't wipe them immediately. After a while, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Faith stiffened. No. Walter stopped. You don't even know what's inside. If it's money, put it away. It is, then put it away. Faith, no. She pushed the card gently back toward him. I helped Jordan because he needed dinner. Walter's hand remained on the envelope. You don't owe me for that. This isn't payment. It'll feel like payment. You returned $30,000 when you needed money. Faith's eyes narrowed. You don't know what I need. Walter immediately realized his mistake. Faith stood. So you did keep watching long enough to figure that out. I saw your car. You saw what I let the street see. Walter put the envelope away. You're right. Faith picked up her bag. I'm not a project, I know. Do you? Walter looked at Jordan's card, then back at Faith. My son wrote that you never made him feel like somebody you had to save. Faith waited. Walter nodded slowly. I think I was about to do exactly that to you. Her expression softened, but only slightly. Walter continued. I'm sorry. Faith sat back down. Not because the problem was solved, because he had finally understood the problem. Walter folded the card. What if I don't give you anything? Faith raised an eyebrow. What if I only tell you about something? About what? A job! Faith almost laughed. I have a job. I know. You've seen enough of it. I have. Walter leaned forward. And that's why I'm mentioning this. Faith studied him suspiciously. Walter didn't push. There's an organization expanding food delivery across Milwaukee. They're looking for somebody who understands routes, drivers' elderly clients' missed deliveries, the things that don't show up correctly on spreadsheets. I'm a delivery driver. You're the woman who knew my son wasn't eating when his own father didn't. Faith looked away. Walter let the silence sit. I can't promise you anything, he said. I don't hire for them. Then why tell me? Because I know the position exists. He paused. And because sometimes helping someone isn't carrying them through a door. Faith looked back at him. Walter finished quietly. Sometimes it's just telling them where the door is. Faith didn't answer. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca. She was already 4 minutes behind schedule. Faith stood. I have deliveries. Walter nodded. As she walked away, he called after her. Faith? She turned. I won't follow you again. Faith held his gaze. Good. Then she left. Outside, the Malibu started on the third attempt. Faith pulled into traffic. For the next several miles, she told herself she wasn't thinking about Walter's offer. But at a red light, she caught herself wondering what kind of job it was. Then the alternator warning light appeared on the dashboard. Faith stared at it. The light stayed on. And suddenly the future wasn't about opportunity. It was about whether her car would survive another day. The Malibu died at 6:54 the next morning. Not at the apartment. Not somewhere convenient. It died in the right lane of West Fond du Lac Avenue, with Chloe in the back seat, and a city bus bearing down behind them. The dashboard flickered once. Then everything went dark. Mom Faith pressed the accelerator. Nothing. She turned the key. A dry click. The bus driver hit the horn. Faith switched on the hazard lights. Stay buckled. What happened? Cars being dramatic again. But Chloe wasn't smiling. Faith stepped into the cold and waved traffic around them. A man in a pickup shouted something she couldn't hear. Nobody stopped. Faith called roadside assistance, then remembered she'd canceled the coverage 4 months earlier. She called Luis at Miller's Auto Repair. Faith. It died. A pause. Alternator. I'm guessing you get to say you told me so. I won't. Can you tow it? I don't have a truck. Faith closed her eyes. Okay. Eventually, a police officer helped push the Malibu onto a side street. Faith and Chloe took the bus. Chloe arrived at school 26 minutes late. Faith reached Lakeside at 8:19. Rebecca Collins was waiting. You okay, car died? Rebecca looked toward the parking lot. How are you doing the route bus? Faith. I can do the central stops. You can't carry 28 meals on a city bus. Give me 12. Rebecca rubbed her forehead. Dispatch already asked why you're late. Tell them. I did. And Rebecca hesitated. Faith understood. The numbers are the numbers. I hate that sentence too. Faith looked away. Rebecca lowered her voice. If you don't have reliable transportation, they're going to move you off delivery. For how long until you have a car? And put me where kitchen prep, maybe. How many hours? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Faith gave a bitter laugh. How many? 22 a week. Faith currently averaged 36. 22 hours wouldn't cover rent, even if she had no other bills. Give me the central route. Faith, please. Rebecca studied her, then handed her a shortened route sheet. 12 stops. Faith took it. Thank you. She completed 11 by bus and on foot. The 12th required another 14-minute walk. By 2:30 her feet hurt, and the handles of the insulated bags had carved red marks into her palms. At stop 12, 81-year-old Mrs. Harper opened the door. You're late. Faith laughed weakly. I knew you'd notice. Where's your car? Taking a vacation. You look terrible. Thank you. Evelyn stepped aside. Faith placed the meal on the counter and loosened the soup lid. You always do that, Evelyn said. Do what? Open it. Your hands hurt. Evelyn looked at her. So do yours. Faith stopped. The old woman gently touched one of the red marks on Faith's palm. Who's opening things for you? Faith had no answer. That evening she collected Chloe from after-school care by bus. When they reached their apartment, another envelope waited beneath the door. Faith knew what it was before touching it. Notice of intent to file for eviction. Balance due $1, $840. 3 business days. She folded it quickly. Chloe saw anyway. Is that another grown-up thing? Faith put it in her purse. Yes. Bad Faith forced a smile. Manageable. Chloe didn't believe her. Neither did Faith. At dinner, they ate spaghetti with the last of the tomato sauce. Chloe was unusually quiet. Then she said, Mrs. Grant says I can give my field trip spot to somebody else. Faith put down her fork. What I told her, I don't want to go. Faith stared at her. You do want to go? No, Chloe. Her daughter looked down. Olivia said the dinosaur thing isn't even real. What dinosaur thing? The museum one. You've been talking about that dinosaur thing for a month. Chloe's eyes filled. Faith understood. Did you give the permission slip back? Chloe nodded. Why silence? Baby, look at me. Chloe did. Because of the $38, a tear rolled down her cheek. We need the car more. Faith felt as if someone had struck her. Not because Chloe was wrong, because a 9-year-old had learned to rank her own happiness beneath household emergencies. Faith moved around the table and knelt beside her. You listen to me. Chloe wiped her face. You are allowed to want things, baby. But no. Faith took both her hands. You are allowed to want to go somewhere. You're allowed to be excited. You're allowed to ask me for things without figuring out which bill I have to sacrifice first. I was helping, I know. That made it worse. Faith pulled her close. You helped me by being 9. Chloe buried her face against Faith's shoulder. Later, after Chloe fell asleep, Faith sat alone at this kitchen table. The eviction notice lay beside her. She emptied her purse. Bus receipt, $2.14. A grocery coupon. Then she went downstairs. The Malibu had been towed to Miller's Auto Repair on credit. The parking space beneath the street lamp was empty. Faith stood looking at it. For years, that ugly old car had embarrassed her. Now the empty space frightened her. She reached into her jacket pocket. The 1996 penny was there. Faith had removed it from the Malibu before the tow truck came. She turned it between her fingers. "What you keep says something about you," she whispered. Her father's words sounded almost cruel tonight. Faith thought about the wallet. $30,000. She could have taken 1-840-DAR. Henry Caldwell might never have noticed. She could have accepted the $1,000 reward. Nobody would have called that wrong. Faith closed her fist. Did I do the right thing? The question surprised her. She wasn't asking whether returning the wallet had been right. She knew it had. She was asking something harder. What did doing right mean when your child was learning to go without because of you? Faith sat on the apartment steps. For the first time in years, she let herself feel tired. Not weak. Tired. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Faith almost ignored it. Then she answered. "Hello, Faith, Walter Bennett?" She straightened. If this is about money, the answer is still no. It isn't. I mean it. I know. Walter's voice was calm. I remembered what I mentioned yesterday. The job. Yes. Faith looked at the empty parking space. I don't have a car anymore. You wouldn't need one for this. Faith said nothing. Walter continued. Milwaukee Community Food Network is expanding. They're hiring an operations route coordinator. Faith almost laughed. Walter, I deliver meals. Exactly. That's not the same as running operations? No. He paused. But you've spent years seeing where operations fail. Faith looked at the penny in her palm. I don't have a college degree. They know that. You told them about me. I told one person there was someone whose resume they should read. Faith's voice hardened. I don't want charity. Then don't take any. Walter waited. Apply, interview. If you're not good enough, they won't hire you. That irritated her. And strangely, she respected it. What exactly are you offering an address? Faith was silent. No money, no promise, no favor after you walk inside. Walter gave her the location. Faith wrote it on the back of the eviction notice. Before hanging up, Walter said, Faith, yes. You opened a door for my son once. She closed her eyes. I'm only pointing at one for you. The call ended. Faith remained on the steps. In one hand was an eviction notice. In the other, a penny worth 1 cent. Between them, written in blue ink, was an address. For the first time that week, Faith wasn't looking at something she had lost. She was looking at somewhere she might go. Faith Russell almost threw the address away. By 6:10 the next morning, the eviction notice was lying on the kitchen table with Walter Bennett's handwriting-free directions scribbled across the back in Faith's own blue ink. Milwaukee Community Food Network, 2147 West Highland Avenue. Operations Route Coordinator. The title sounded like it belonged to someone who owned more than one pair of work shoes. Faith stood at the stove making oatmeal while Chloe sat nearby. What are you staring at? Nothing. Chloe leaned sideways. That's the bad grown-up paper. Faith flipped it over. Today it's something else. What a job. Chloe's spoon stopped. You're getting a new job. I said a job, not my job. What's it called? Faith hesitated. Operations Route Coordinator. Chloe blinked. That sounds important. It sounds like somebody wears a badge. Do they? I don't know. Then ask for one. Faith laughed. It was the first easy laugh she'd had in days. After taking Chloe to school by bus, Faith went to Lakeside. She completed another reduced route on foot and public transportation. At lunch, she borrowed an old desktop computer in the staff room. She searched Milwaukee Community Food Network. The organization coordinated grocery distribution, senior meal deliveries, mobile pantries, and emergency food access across several neighborhoods. Then she found the job posting. Faith read the requirements: route planning, driver coordination, delivery metrics, emergency response, community partnerships, 3 years operations experience preferred, bachelor's degree preferred. Faith stopped at that line. Preferred, not required. Still, she almost closed the page. Then she read the responsibilities again. Identify delivery bottlenecks. Coordinate high-priority clients. Reduce missed deliveries. Communicate with drivers. Adjust routes during severe weather. Faith leaned closer. She had been doing pieces of that work for years. Nobody had called it operations. At 2:15, she asked Rebecca if she could print the application. Rebecca read the title. Coordinator Faith immediately became defensive. "I'm just looking." Rebecca looked at her. "Why are you saying that like you're apologizing?" Faith didn't answer. Rebecca printed the application. "Take it." That evening, Faith and Chloe turned the kitchen table into a makeshift office. Faith had no functioning laptop. Her phone screen was cracked. So she used paper, a city map, a notebook, 3 pens. Chloe brought a box of colored pencils. "What are those for professional consulting? You're 9. Cheap professional consulting." Faith smiled. "Fine." She studied the Food Network's publicly available delivery zones. Some routes immediately bothered her. "This doesn't make sense." Chloe looked up. "What this route?" Faith traced a line. "It says 28 minutes. Is that bad?" "It would be 28 minutes if nobody actually lived there." Chloe frowned. Faith pointed. "This building has 1 elevator. It breaks all the time. How do you know I deliver 2 blocks away?" She marked it. Another route crossed an intersection that backed up during school dismissal. Another served 3 senior buildings but scheduled them late afternoon. Faith knew many elderly clients needed meals earlier because medication schedules depended on food. She wrote notes. By 9:30, the table had disappeared beneath paper. Chloe had fallen asleep with her head against Faith's arm. Faith carried her to bed. When she returned, one corner of the map kept curling upward. Faith searched for something heavy. Her fingers found the penny. 1996. She placed it on the corner. The paper flattened. Faith stared at it. Her father's words came back. "What you keep says something about you. What you return says even more." For years, the penny had represented restraint. Tonight, it held open a map. Faith sat down. Maybe some things weren't only reminders of where you'd been. Maybe they could help hold steady the place you were trying to reach. The next morning, Walter called. "Did you apply? I haven't decided." "You spent half the night preparing, didn't you?" Faith frowned. "How would you know that?" "Because people who aren't interested don't ask me whether the organization uses independent drivers." Faith had called him twice. "That proves nothing." Walter laughed. Then his voice became serious. "I need you to understand something. What Henry Caldwell supports the organization financially." Faith went silent. "You should have told me. I'm telling you now. Does he control hiring? No? Can he influence it?" Walter paused. "He probably could." Faith stood from the kitchen chair. "Then I'm not interested. He isn't involved." "How do I know that? Because I told him not to be." That surprised her. "You told your boss what I told him. If he touched your application, you'd walk away." Faith almost smiled. That was accurate. "I know," Walter continued. "The director is Patricia Monroe. She makes the decision. Henry won't call her. And I sent her your resume." Faith stiffened. "Walter, nothing else. You promised." "I promised no favor after you walked through the door." "I haven't walked through it." "Then consider the resume the address." Faith sighed. "After this, you're done." "Completely." Faith looked at the map. "Good." 2 days later, she stood outside Milwaukee Community Food Network wearing black pants, a white blouse, and the only blazer she owned. She had bought it 7 years earlier for a funeral. Chloe had helped lint roll it that morning. Faith carried a folder containing her resume and handwritten route analysis. Inside the lobby, Walter sat on a bench. Faith stopped. "What are you doing here waiting? For what to drive Mr. Caldwell to a meeting upstairs?" Faith narrowed her eyes. Convenient. Walter raised both hands. I am not going into your interview. You better not. I enjoy living. Despite herself, Faith smiled. Then she noticed a polished conference room door down the hallway. Her smile disappeared. I shouldn't be here? Walter stood. Why, look at me, I am. I deliver food, yes. I don't have a degree. Yes. I've never managed a department. Yes. Faith became irritated. Could you disagree with something? Walter shook his head. No. She stared at him. He pointed toward the folder. What's in their notes? About what their roots. Did they ask for those? No. Walter nodded toward the door. Then you already came with something they don't have. Faith looked down. What your eyes? She didn't respond. Walter stepped back. No promises. Faith? Good, no rescue. Good, just a door. Faith looked at him. Then at the conference room. She thought about Chloe surrendering her field trip, about pushing the Malibu through traffic, about Jordan pretending he wasn't hungry, about every apartment represented by a number on a route sheet. Faith tightened her grip on the folder. Then she walked forward. Patricia Monroe opened the conference room door. Faith Russell? Faith took one breath. Yes. Come in. Faith stepped through. Walter remained outside. And for once, nobody followed her. The first thing Faith Russell noticed inside the conference room was the table. It was enormous. Polished walnut long enough for 14 chairs with a speakerphone in the center and glass pitchers of water placed at both ends. Faith had spent most of her working life eating lunch in parked cars, church basements, or staff rooms where one microwave served 20 people. She suddenly became very aware of the folder in her hands. Please, Patricia Monroe said. Have a seat. Patricia was 58, silver threaded through her short curls, wearing a navy suit without anything about her suggesting she needed to prove she belonged there. Two other people sat beside her. Faith, this is Daniel Mercer, our finance director, and Angela Price, regional operations manager. Faith shook their hands. Daniel glanced at her resume. Lakeside Senior Meals, 8 years. As a delivery driver, 7 years delivery, 1 year kitchen and dispatch before that. And no formal management role. Faith felt the question exactly where she expected to. No. Daniel made a note. Faith noticed. Patricia asked, why apply for an operations coordinator position? Because my car died. Because my rent is overdue. Because my daughter gave up a field trip to save me $38. Faith said none of those things. Instead, she answered, because I know what happens after somebody makes a route on a computer. Angela leaned forward. What do you mean? Faith opened her folder. I brought something. She unfolded the city map. The 1996 penny was still taped lightly to one corner because Chloe had insisted it was part of the presentation. Faith almost removed it. She didn't. I looked at the sample routes posted with your expansion proposal. Daniel frowned. Those weren't intended as interview material, I know. Faith pointed to a red mark. This one says, a driver can finish these 11 stops in 38 minutes. Angela looked. That's the estimate? It won't happen. Why, Faith tapped an apartment complex. Briarwood Towers. Patricia nodded. Senior housing. 1 elevator. Angela checked her notes. There are two elevator shafts. One has been broken since February. Angela looked up. Faith continued. Faith, you've scheduled 3 deliveries there for 7 minutes total. 7 minutes gets you from the parking lot to the 4th floor if nobody stops the elevator. Daniel asked, You've delivered their next building. Faith moved her finger. This intersection backs up between 240 and 325 because Roosevelt Middle School lets out. She pointed again. This street floods after heavy rain. Again. These 4 clients are over 75 and your schedule puts them after 4:30. Why is that a problem? Daniel asked. Maybe it isn't. Faith looked at him. But if any of them take medication with food at 4, it becomes 1. The room went quiet. Daniel leaned back. These are assumptions. Some are. Faith didn't become defensive. That's why you ask. Ask whom the people getting the food. Angela smiled faintly. Faith continued. And the drivers. Daniel glanced at her resume again. Our software processes. Traffic data, distance, fuel cost. Delivery windows. Does it process broken elevators? No. Does it know Mrs. Carter takes 6 minutes to reach her door with a walker? Daniel paused. No. Does it know Mr. Wallace can't reach food if somebody leaves it on the wrong side of his table? Patricia's eyes sharpened. Daniel said those are service notes, not route logistics. Faith looked at the map. With respect, that's the problem. Silence. Faith immediately wondered if she'd gone too far, but Patricia said, explain. Faith took a breath. Everybody keeps separating the route from the person. She traced a blue line across the map. On paper, this is 9 stops. Her finger rested on one dot, but every dot is somebody waiting for dinner. Nobody spoke. Faith continued more quietly. If the driver arrives 10 minutes late, your spreadsheet sees 10 minutes. She thought about Rebecca. Sometimes those 10 minutes mean a driver found somebody on the bathroom floor. Patricia glanced at Angela. Faith continued. Sometimes a driver waits because an 80-year-old woman can't open her soup lid. Daniel said, but we still need efficiency. Yes, Faith answered immediately. You absolutely do. That surprised him. If your routes waste time, fewer people get fed. If drivers burn too much gas, money disappears. If one stop takes 20 unnecessary minutes, somebody else waits. Faith pulled out another sheet, so I changed it. Angela took the page. Faith had rearranged 12 stops. What did you use? Bus schedules, school dismissal times, building entrances, average stop time from my own route, and your public mileage numbers. Daniel examined the sheet. You did this yourself? My daughter colored it. Patricia smiled. Consultant, very expensive. A small laugh moved through the room. For the first time, Faith's shoulders relaxed. Then Daniel asked the question she had been waiting for. The position lists a bachelor's degree as preferred. I saw that. You don't have one. No. Why should we overlook that? Faith looked at him. I don't think you should. Daniel seemed surprised. I think you should decide whether the degree gives you something I don't have. Faith folded her hands. If it does hire the person with the degree. Patricia watched closely. But if what you need is someone who knows why drivers fall behind, why clients get missed, why people stop answering doors, why somebody who says they aren't hungry might still need you to come back tomorrow. Jordan entered her mind. Faith steadied herself. Then I know that work. Daniel stopped writing. Faith didn't ask them to understand her circumstances. She didn't mention the eviction. She didn't mention Walter. She didn't mention the $30,000. For 25 minutes, they asked about conflict scheduling, driver shortages, documentation, and emergency response. Faith answered what she knew. When she didn't know, she said so. At 11:42, Patricia closed her notebook. Thank you, Faith. Faith recognized dismissal. She gathered her papers. Thank you for reading my resume. She walked into the hallway. Walter was sitting where she'd left him. He stood. How'd it go? I insulted their software. Walter blinked. That sounds promising. Faith laughed nervously. I don't think I'm getting the job. She headed toward the elevator. Behind her, the conference room door opened. Ms. Russell Faith turned. Patricia stood there. One more question. Faith returned. Patricia held Faith's route map. The Weather Service is predicting an early snow system tomorrow. I heard. We were planning a tabletop exercise for our expansion team. Faith waited. Patricia looked at the rearranged routes. I'd like you to come back. For another interview? Not exactly. What then? Patricia's expression was unreadable. Show us what happens when the map stops behaving. Faith glanced at Walter. He said nothing. This door was hers. Faith looked back at Patricia. What time? 7 a.m. Faith nodded. I'll be here. That evening, the first snowflakes began falling over Milwaukee. By midnight, the forecast had changed. 3 inches became 6, 6 became 9, and by dawn, Faith's hypothetical test would no longer be hypothetical at all. At 6:18 the next morning, Milwaukee disappeared beneath snow. Faith Russell stood at a bus stop with one gloved hand holding her folder beneath her coat, while wind drove ice against the shelter glass. The city bus was 17 minutes late, then 23. Faith checked her phone. 6:41. Patricia Monroe had asked her to arrive at 7. Faith called. Patricia, it's Faith Russell. Where are you, North Avenue? Bus is delayed. Don't rush. Half my staff isn't here. Faith heard voices behind Patricia. Phones ringing. Someone shouting about canceled routes. What happened? The storm moved faster than forecast. Faith looked at the street. A bus finally appeared through the snow. Patricia said our tabletop exercise just became something else. Faith boarded. What do you mean, come in safely? You'll see. At 7:36, Faith entered Milwaukee Community Food Network. The calm office from yesterday was gone. A large monitor displayed delivery routes across the city. Red markers covered the map. Angela Price stood beside a whiteboard. Route 4 canceled. Why driver can't get out of Wauwatosa. Route 7 van stuck. A dispatcher raised his voice. Mrs. Crawford called again. She needs food before medication. Patricia saw Faith. You made it. Eventually. Patricia handed her a printed list. 29 high-priority deliveries, 9 drivers available, 3 vehicles delayed, 2 church kitchens have emergency stock. Faith stared at her. This is the test? Patricia almost laughed. The test was supposed to involve markers and coffee. Another phone rang. Today we're feeding people. Faith removed her coat. What do you need me to do? Patricia pointed toward an empty workstation. Show me what happens when the map stops behaving. Faith sat. For the first few minutes, she simply listened. That was something Lakeside had taught her. People who entered a crisis wanting to prove they were smart usually wasted the first 10 minutes talking. Faith asked questions instead. Which clients have medical notes? Angela handed her a list. Which drivers have 4-wheel drive too? Which churches are open? New Hope and Grace Community. Who has refrigerated storage, Grace? Faith took a pen. She circled 7 names. These first. Daniel Mercer, the finance director from yesterday's interview, stood nearby. Those aren't geographically closest. No. Then why Faith pointed? Insulin, blood thinner, dialysis recovery. These people need food tied to medication or treatment. Daniel looked at Patricia. Patricia said nothing. Faith continued, Stop trying to make 9 perfect routes. Angela frowned. What do you suggest? Make 3 layers. Faith drew lines across the map. Critical. Limited mobility. Everyone else. She circled New Hope Church. Send bulk meals here instead of individual drivers crossing downtown. Angela leaned closer. Use it as a transfer point, yes. That's not in our emergency protocol. A manager named Stephen Cole turned from another desk. We can't improvise distribution sites. Faith looked at him. Is the church approved to handle food? Yes, but do they have volunteers? Yes. Then what's the problem? The protocol requires central dispatch authorization. Faith pointed toward Patricia. She's standing right there. Patricia almost smiled. Authorized. Stephen didn't. Faith turned back to the map. Call the drivers. Angela said dispatch already has their locations. I don't want locations. Faith picked up a phone. I want road conditions. She called the first driver. Tell me what you're seeing. Sherman Boulevard is bad. Passable barely. Side streets. Worse. Faith marked the information. Second driver, third, fourth. Within 15 minutes, the map changed. Not according to software. According to people actually driving through the storm. Faith rerouted 2 vans. One went to Grace Community Church with refrigerated meals. Another carried shelf-stable packages to New Hope. Volunteer drivers would handle short neighborhood deliveries from there. At 9:22, something went wrong. A driver called. "Faith, I'm stuck behind a collision on Lisbon." Faith checked the map. "How long? Police say 40 minutes. Faith's stomach dropped. She had sent him there. His van carried meals for 4 critical clients. Daniel looked at the clock. Stephen folded his arms. "This is why we don't improvise." Faith felt heat rise in her face. Yesterday she could have defended herself. Today somebody's medication schedule was sitting inside a van trapped behind wrecked cars. She took a breath. "I made the wrong call." Nobody spoke. Faith looked at Angela. Who is closest to the van? Angela checked. "Marcus, Route 3. Call him. He's already carrying 6 deliveries. 2 are near New Hope. Transfer them there." Faith picked up another phone. "Get Marcus to meet the blocked driver at 35th and North if he can reach it. Move the 4 critical meals." Stephen said that adds mileage. Faith turned. "Yes. And overtime." "Yes. You're solving one delay by creating another." Faith looked at him. "I'm solving the dangerous delay first." Patricia watched without interrupting. By 10:05, the 4 meals had been transferred. At 10:47, Mrs. Crawford received hers. At 11:12, the dialysis patient received his. Faith marked each completed delivery with a small check. No celebration. There were still 18 people waiting. By early afternoon, snow had reached nearly 8 inches. Faith hadn't eaten. Angela placed a granola bar beside her. "You'll be useless if you pass out." Faith opened it. "That's exactly what Mrs. Green tells me." "Who's Mrs. Green? One of my stops." Angela smiled. "Of course." At 3:30, 26 of 29 high-priority deliveries were complete. 2 remaining clients had family members who could safely collect meals from New Hope. The last was an 84-year-old man named Leonard Shaw. No family nearby? Wheelchair user? His building sat on an unplowed side street. Stephen shook his head. "No vehicle is getting there." Faith studied the map. Then she noticed something. Bus route. Angela looked. Buses are delayed, but they're running on Center. Faith traced the distance. 3 blocks from his building. Patricia understood. "You're not suggesting a driver?" "No." Faith stood. "I've carried meals farther than 3 blocks. Patricia shook her head. "You're coordinating. So coordinate without me for 20 minutes. You're interviewing for a job, Faith?" Faith pulled on her coat. "No." Everyone looked at her. Faith zipped it. "Right now, Mr. Shaw is waiting for dinner." She took 1 insulated meal bag. A staff member drove her as far as the plowed road allowed. Faith walked the remaining 3 blocks through knee-deep snow. At 4:16, Leonard Shaw opened his apartment door. "You came." Faith brushed snow from her shoulders. "You ordered dinner." He laughed. "I didn't think anybody would make it." Faith handed him the meal. Neither did the map. When she returned to headquarters, the room was quieter. 29 names appeared on the board. 29 checks. Walter Bennett stood near the lobby entrance. He had arrived to pick up Henry Caldwell after a meeting upstairs. He watched Faith enter, soaked from the knees down, hair damp around her face. For one moment he saw Jordan's old apartment door. The extra soup. The woman who kept coming back. Faith didn't notice Walter. She went directly to the dispatch table. "Everybody accounted for?" Angela nodded. "Everybody." Faith finally exhaled. Patricia approached. "My office." Faith's stomach tightened. She glanced at the clock. She had challenged protocol, made a routing mistake, authorized extra mileage, and left headquarters during an emergency. Perhaps she had proved exactly why experience wasn't enough. Faith followed Patricia into the office. The door closed. Patricia sat behind her desk. Faith remained standing. "If this is about Lisbon," Faith began, "that was my mistake. I know, I should have checked the collision reports." "Yes." Faith swallowed. Patricia folded her hands. And when you realized you were wrong, I fixed it. Patricia nodded. Then she slid a folder across the desk. Faith looked down. Her name was printed on the first page. Faith Russell, Operations Route Coordinator. Faith stared at it. Patricia leaned back. Sit down, Faith. This time Faith did. Faith Russell read the first page 3 times. Operations Route Coordinator, full-time. Health insurance, paid time off. A salary that made her blink and calculate twice. Not enough to transform her life into something unrecognizable. Enough to make it stable. Enough that a broken alternator would eventually become an inconvenience instead of a catastrophe. Enough that $38 would once again be the price of a field trip rather than a family emergency. Faith looked up. Is this real? Patricia Monroe smiled. I generally don't print imaginary employment offers. Faith touched the edge of the folder. What about the degree preferred? Patricia leaned forward. Not required. What about Stephen? He thinks you challenge procedures too quickly. He's not wrong. No. Patricia smiled. But procedures should survive questions. Faith looked at the salary again. When would I start Monday? Faith almost laughed. That's 4 days. Is that a problem, no? Then she remembered Lakeside, Rebecca, her roots, Mrs. Harper's soup lids. I need to give notice, of course, and I don't have a car. The position is primarily office-based. Faith nodded slowly. Patricia continued. We also offer a payroll advance for transportation emergencies after onboarding. It's deducted gradually. Faith's eyes narrowed automatically. Interest none, fees none. What's the catch you work here? Faith laughed. For the first time in months, the future seemed to contain numbers that could actually fit together. She signed. Outside the office, Walter Bennett stood near the lobby windows. He didn't approach. Faith walked toward him, carrying the folder. Walter looked at her face. Well? Faith held up the paperwork. You knew no. You're smiling like you knew. I'm smiling because you're holding the folder instead of throwing it at me. Faith laughed. I got it. Walter's smile disappeared for a moment. Something deeper replaced it. Good. Just that. No, I told you so. No, you owe me. Faith appreciated that. You opened the door, she said. Walter shook his head. I told you the address. You sent my resume. That was the address with postage. Faith smiled. Then she became serious. Thank you. Walter nodded. Jordan would have liked this. Faith looked down at the folder. Maybe. No. Walter's voice softened. He would have. On Friday morning, Faith entered Rebecca Collins's office at Lakeside. Rebecca saw the envelope. Oh, Faith sat. I'm giving notice. Rebecca leaned back. We're Milwaukee Community Food Network. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. The expansion program operations route coordinator. For 2 seconds, Rebecca said nothing. Then she stood and hugged Faith. Faith hadn't expected that. You're supposed to be angry. I am. Rebecca released her. You're one of my best drivers. I thought I was 11 minutes late. You're irritating too. They both laughed. Rebecca sat again. Faith, I'm glad somebody finally figured out what you can do. The sentence stayed with her. Not because nobody had valued her before, because Faith herself had stopped asking whether she could do more. On Monday, Patricia helped her complete the payroll advance paperwork. Faith requested $700, not $1,000, not $840, exactly enough to repair the Malibu and cover transportation until it was ready. At Miller's Auto Repair, Luis stared at her. You sure fix it before I change my mind. Alternator and belt, everything we discussed. He smiled. What happened, new job? Luis held out his hand. Faith shook it. Congratulations. 2 days later, the Malibu started on the first turn. Faith sat behind the wheel and listened. No whine, no warning light. She almost cried over an alternator. Instead, she laughed. Then she placed the 1996 penny back into the cup holder. Welcome home. The rent remained. Whather $840. Faith met with the property manager carrying her employment letter and proposed a repayment schedule. The manager examined it. You can pay $400 Friday, yes. Then additional payments, every paycheck until it's current. The woman studied Faith. Finally, she nodded. We can hold the filing if you keep this schedule. Faith exhaled. Thank you. She walked outside feeling 10 pounds lighter. That afternoon, Walter called. Mr. Caldwell wants to speak with you. About what, the wallet? Faith sighed. Walter? Just talk to him. Henry met Faith at the Community Food Network office. He was carrying an envelope. Faith looked at it. If that's money, I'm leaving. Henry smiled. Walter warned me you'd say that. He placed it on the table. I heard about your rent. Faith's expression hardened. From whom? Not Walter. Patricia mentioned you were arranging in advance. I asked questions I probably shouldn't have. You probably shouldn't have. Henry accepted the rebuke. Let me pay the balance. No, Faith, it's $1,840. I know exactly what it is. You returned $30,000 to me, and this is less than 7% of that. Faith stared at him. That isn't how honesty works. Henry went quiet. Faith continued. If I return your wallet and you pay my rent, then somewhere in my head, returning, it becomes an investment. I don't see it that way. I do. Henry slowly withdrew the envelope. Faith noticed genuine confusion in his face. He wasn't trying to insult her. Money had simply always been his easiest tool. Then Faith thought about the drivers at Lakeside. Denise's transmission had failed the previous winter. She missed 9 days of work. Another driver had lost his route after his car was totaled. Faith leaned forward. You really want to help? Henry nodded. Then don't pay my rent. What should I do? Help people keep working. Henry waited. Faith explained. Delivery workers were often one mechanical failure away from losing income. A $400 repair could become unemployment. A dead battery could become missed rent. What if there were an emergency transportation fund, Faith asked. Small repair grants, temporary vehicle assistance, bus or rideshare credits when a car dies. Henry listened differently now. Not like a man preparing to write a check. Like a man being asked to build something. How much would you need? I don't know yet. Find out. Faith smiled slightly. You're serious. You told me not to pay your rent. Henry leaned back. So give me somewhere better to put the money. Faith looked through the glass wall at the dispatch floor. Drivers moved between desks carrying route sheets, people whose lives could collapse because of one alternator. The $30,000 she'd returned had once represented everything she desperately needed. Now, for the first time, Faith saw another possibility. One person's emergency money could become many people's second chance. And this time, accepting help wouldn't require anyone to surrender their dignity. Walter Bennett chose a Sunday morning. No black Lincoln, no suit, no Henry Caldwell waiting in the back seat. He arrived at Faith Russell's apartment in an old blue Ford pickup that Faith had never seen before. She stepped outside wearing a dark wool coat and stopped when she noticed him leaning against the truck. So the Lincoln isn't permanently attached to you. Walter looked offended. I have a personality outside that car. I'll believe it when I see evidence. He smiled. Then Faith noticed the flowers on the passenger seat. White chrysanthemums. Her expression changed. You ready? Faith nodded. Chloe was spending the morning with a school friend's family. Walter opened the passenger door. Neither of them said where they were going. They both knew. The cemetery sat south of Milwaukee, where rows of gray stones stretched across gently sloping ground beneath bare November trees. The snow from earlier in the week had mostly melted. Walter parked near a narrow path. For a while he didn't get out. Faith waited. Finally, Walter picked up the flowers. It's strange. What as I've been coming here 3 years? He stared through the windshield. I still sit in the truck first. Faith understood. Some doors required preparation even when you'd opened them many times. They walked quietly. Jordan Bennett's headstone was simple. Jordan Elijah Bennett, 1991-2023, beloved son. Walter placed the chrysanthemums against the stone. Faith stood several feet behind him. Hey, kid. Walter's voice was almost casual. That made it hurt more. I found her. Faith looked away. Walter remained crouched. The food lady. He laughed softly. You could have written her name down. Faith smiled through the ache in her chest. Walter stood. For several minutes they said nothing. Then he reached inside his coat. Jordan's card. Faith recognized the folds. I thought you might want to read the rest. I read it, not all of it. Walter handed it over. Faith unfolded the page. The first lines were familiar. If you ever meet the lady from Lakeside, tell her thanks, the extra soup, the meals. Then Faith reached the section Walter hadn't shown her. Dad, don't feel bad if I didn't tell you everything. Her eyes moved more slowly. Sometimes it's easier to let a stranger see you're struggling because they don't remember the version of you that used to be strong. Faith looked at Walter. His eyes remained on the grave. She continued. I know you'd have helped. That's probably why I didn't tell you. I didn't want to see your face when you realized I couldn't handle things anymore. Faith swallowed. Below it, Jordan had written, The meal lady never asked me what went wrong. She never asked why I couldn't afford groceries. She just knocked again the next day. And then the sentence Faith already knew. She never made me feel poor. Faith lowered the card. Walter took a long breath. I drove people around for a living. Faith waited. Still do. He stared toward the rows of headstones. I knew when Mr. Caldwell had a dentist appointment. I knew which restaurant his wife preferred for anniversaries. I knew which airport entrance would save 8 minutes. His jaw tightened. But I didn't know my son was hungry. Walter, I should have known. He hid it. I should have known anyway. Faith looked at Jordan's name. My mother used to hide bills. Walter glanced at her. When I was 14, she'd put unopened envelopes in a kitchen drawer. If I asked whether everything was okay, she'd smile. Faith folded the card carefully. She thought protecting me meant making sure I never saw her scared. Walter listened. Years later, I realized she wasn't lying because she didn't trust me. She was lying because she loved me. Walter looked back at the grave. Jordan loved you. That doesn't make me feel better. No. Faith handed the card back. But maybe it's closer to the truth. Walter's eyes filled. I had money, I know. I could have bought groceries for 10 years. I know. I would have moved him home. I know. Then why let a stranger feed him? Faith was quiet for a moment. Because I was nobody. Walter frowned. To him, she continued. I didn't know who Jordan had been before he got sick. I didn't know what kind of job he used to have or how independent he was. Faith touched the edge of the card. So when I saw him struggling, there was no old version of Jordan for him to disappoint. Walter closed his eyes. Faith understood something then. Walter hadn't followed her because of gratitude alone. He had followed the unanswered question that had haunted him for 3 years. Who had seen my son when I didn't? Faith stepped closer. You didn't fail because somebody else noticed something. Walter wiped his face. I wasn't there. You were his father. That doesn't mean you were supposed to be able to read his mind. Walter laughed bitterly. Sounds obvious when you say it. Most painful things do. They stood beside Jordan for a long time. Eventually, Walter said, How's the new job? Apparently I'm bossy. I could have told them that. They hired me anyway. And the transportation fund Patricia approved the structure Friday. Henry had committed the first $30,000. The coincidence had not been lost on Faith. The exact amount inside the wallet. It would provide emergency repair assistance, temporary transportation, and short-term support for delivery workers, at risk of losing employment because their vehicles failed. Walter smiled. Jordan would have liked that too. Faith looked at the grave. Maybe that's how you thank him. Walter raised an eyebrow. Thank my own son for leaving the note. Walter considered it. Then he nodded. Before they left, Faith crouched beside the headstone. She didn't pray. She didn't give a speech. She simply adjusted one of the flowers the wind had knocked sideways. I remember the blue hoodie now, she whispered. Walter laughed behind her. He refused to throw that away. He also lied about not being hungry. He was stubborn. Faith, I noticed. As they walked back toward the truck, Walter stopped. Faith. She turned. Thank you for Jordan. For not treating him like a tragedy before he became one. Faith couldn't answer. That was when the tears came. Not dramatic sobs. Just quiet tears she couldn't stop. For months she had held herself together through overdue rent, a dying car, missed meals, and the terror of disappointing Chloe. She hadn't cried when she held $30,000 she desperately needed. She hadn't cried when the Malibu died. But standing on a cold cemetery path, Faith finally understood that something she'd barely remembered had mattered enough to survive Jordan. Walter didn't hug her. He didn't tell her not to cry. He simply stood beside her. Sometimes dignity meant knowing when not to rescue someone from their own feelings. On the drive home, Faith looked out at Milwaukee, passing beyond the window. Apartment buildings, bus shelters, churches, grocery stores. Thousands of doors. Behind any one of them, someone might be hiding how badly they were struggling. Faith thought about Jordan's sentence. She never made me feel poor. And Walter thought about something else. For years he had believed grief asked one question. Why didn't I see? Now he understood. It could ask another. Who can I see before it's too late? Walter tightened his hands around the steering wheel. For the first time since Jordan died, that question didn't feel like punishment. It felt like somewhere to go. 4 months later, the 2008 Chevrolet Malibu was still ugly. Faith Russell considered that a victory. The rust above the rear wheel remained. The driver's side mirror still carried a strip of black electrical tape. One speaker crackled whenever the radio volume went above 15. But every morning when Faith turned the key, the engine started. That mattered. At 7:08 on a March morning, Faith pulled into Milwaukee Community Food Network wearing her employee badge. Operations Route Coordinator. Chloe had laughed the first time she saw it. Told you the job sounded like it came with a badge. Faith had admitted defeat. Her life hadn't become luxurious. She still compared grocery prices. She still knew exactly when the electric bill cleared. She still carried coupons in her purse. But there was now $614 in her savings account. Not much to some people. To Faith, it was breathing room. The rent was current. The refrigerator was full. And $38 had returned to being just $38. Chloe had gone on her museum field trip. She came home talking so fast about dinosaur fossils that Faith had barely understood half of it. Faith understood the important part. Her daughter had stopped apologizing for going. At work, the emergency transportation program had officially launched. Henry Caldwell provided the first $30,000. Faith insisted on clear eligibility rules and confidential applications. No public photographs. No ceremonial checks. No stories posted online without permission. The first recipient was a delivery driver named Carlos, whose transmission failed. The fund covered a temporary rental and part of the repair. Carlos missed 0 shifts. The second recipient was a 61-year-old kitchen worker whose bus route had been suspended. The fund covered transportation until she found another route. Nobody became rich. Nobody needed to. They stayed employed. That was the point. Walter Bennett volunteered every Thursday afternoon. His official role was driver safety mentor. Faith called him the world's most overdressed volunteer. Walter called Faith the woman who thinks every traffic light is personally insulting her. Their friendship settled into something neither had expected. Walter still drove Henry. But one day each week he taught new drivers something that couldn't be found in route software. Don't just watch the address, he told them. Watch the person. Rebecca Collins became involved too. Lakeside Senior Meals began sharing route data with Faith's team. The first meeting was uncomfortable. Rebecca sat across the conference table and said, "You realize I'm now taking instructions from someone I used to write up for being late." Faith smiled. 11 minutes, I remember. I saved a man's life. I remember that too. They redesigned the policy. Emergency welfare delays were now documented separately from ordinary route delays. A tiny administrative change. But Faith knew systems were built from tiny things. So were failures. So were acts of kindness. One Saturday afternoon, Faith and Chloe stopped at a grocery store on West North Avenue. They bought chicken rice apples, cereal, and one box of chocolate cookies Chloe claimed were medically necessary. At checkout, Faith pretended to examine the price. $7. Inflation. You're 9. I understand economics. You understand cookies. They were laughing when an elderly woman ahead of them finished paying. She wore a purple coat and moved slowly with a cane. As she placed her wallet into her purse, a white envelope slipped from the side pocket. It landed near the register. Nobody noticed. Except Chloe. She looked down. Then at the woman walking toward the exit. Chloe picked up the envelope. "Ma'am." The woman didn't hear. Chloe looked at Faith. Faith said nothing. She didn't need to. Chloe ran. "Ma'am?" The woman turned near the automatic doors. "You dropped this." She handed over the envelope. The woman opened it slightly. Her face changed. "Oh, honey." She pressed a hand to her chest. "My grocery money." Chloe shrugged. "It was yours." Faith stopped breathing for half a second. Not because the sentence was extraordinary, because it wasn't. The woman thanked Chloe twice. Chloe returned, carrying the cookies. "Can we go now?" Faith stared at her. "What nothing? You're doing the mom face." "What mom face?" "The one where you're about to say something emotional." Faith laughed. "Get in the car." They loaded the groceries into the Malibu. Chloe climbed into the passenger seat. As Faith returned the cart, Chloe noticed something in the cup holder. A penny. 1996. She picked it up. When Faith returned, Chloe held it toward the windshield. "You still have this?" "Of course. You've had it forever?" "Almost." Chloe turned it over. "You know it can't buy anything. That isn't why I keep it." "Then why?" Faith started the engine. She didn't pull away. "My dad gave it to me." Grandpa Faith nodded. "I found $5 outside a store when I was little." "Did you buy candy?" "I wanted to." "What happened?" "The woman who lost it came back." Chloe understood. "You returned it, eventually." Faith smiled. "My dad gave me that penny afterward. That seems like a bad trade. I told him exactly that." "What did he say?" Faith looked at the coin in Chloe's palm. "What you keep says something about you. What you return says even more." Chloe considered this. Then she looked toward the grocery store. Near the entrance stood a donation box for the neighborhood food pantry. Chloe opened the door. "Where are you going, Wait?" She ran back. Faith watched through the windshield. Chloe approached the donation box. She looked at the penny one last time, then dropped through the slot. Faith's smile disappeared. For an instant, she wanted to stop her. That penny had survived nearly 3 decades. Her father's death, 4 apartments, bad jobs, Chloe's birth. The hardest months of Faith's life. Then Faith understood. She had spent years believing keeping the penny honored her father. Chloe had found another way. She returned to the Malibu. "You gave away my penny. You said what you returned says more." Faith stared at her. "That's annoying." Chloe grinned. "Runs in the family." Faith laughed. Then she looked at the empty cup holder. For the first time, it didn't feel empty. Months earlier, $30,000 had rested beside that penny. Faith had believed the choice was between keeping money and returning it. Now she understood the story had never really been about money. It was about what happened after people chose to see one another. Faith had seen Jordan. Walter had eventually seen Faith. Henry had learned to see workers beyond a check. And now Chloe had seen an envelope fall when everyone else kept walking. Faith pulled out of the parking lot. In the mirror, the donation box became smaller, then disappeared. But some things didn't disappear simply because you could no longer see them. Sometimes kindness traveled quietly from one person to another until nobody remembered where it started. And sometimes the smallest thing you gave away became the most valuable thing you ever passed on. There are moments when doing the right thing feels almost unfair. Faith returned $30,000 while facing eviction, a broken car, and a daughter learning to make herself smaller because money was tight. Nothing guaranteed that honesty would save her. That is what made her choice meaningful. Real kindness is not a contract with life. We don't help someone because the universe owes us repayment. Faith barely remembered bringing Jordan extra soup. Jordan never forgot. Walter eventually learned something equally important. Helping someone does not always mean rescuing them. Faith didn't need a savior with a checkbook. She needed someone to recognize what she could do and point toward a door she had stopped believing was meant for her. Walter opened that possibility. Faith walked through it herself, and Henry learned that money can do more than erase one person's emergency. Used thoughtfully, it can create a structure that gives many people the chance to remain standing. Perhaps that is why the penny mattered. Its financial value was almost nothing. Yet it carried a lesson from Faith's father to Faith, from Faith to Chloe, and finally from Chloe into the hands of someone they might never meet. What we give doesn't always return to us. Sometimes it moves forward. If someone once showed you kindness when you felt invisible, share that memory in the comments. And if this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, send it to them. Subscribe if you'd like to stay for more stories about ordinary people whose quiet